is a very, very special discussion. I'm so excited. I'm a huge Virginia fan. She knows it. I sometimes actually just send her a random fan mail. So this is an absolute dream come true for me. And it's very interesting. So we had an original idea about kind of the outlines of this salon and what we wanted to talk about: Mastodon, Twitter, Elon, truth, and democracy. But then we did a Twitter Spaces last Friday, and Virginia is just like this endless arsenal of amazing stories. And so now I feel that the outlines of the salon might be much wider and might include more of a maybe stories reminiscence about our own histories online. So if you have great stories of what happened to you in the early days of living our lives online, start thinking, because they might you might be called upon to share something. Virginia, to kick off, what is your Twitter bio? Are you a literary theorist? Are you a philosopher of the internet? Or do you just say journalist and like let people fill in the gaps?
I think I'm a journalist first and foremost. It's been a long time. I started as a fact checker at The New Yorker in 1993. I did finish a dissertation in English. My dissertation was on finance and fiction, so inflationary dynamics in various novels. I think I've succeeded in making the novels boring rather than making finance interesting, or monetary policy interesting. But I got really interested in sort of an interdisciplinary combination of things like finance that seem to be driven by numbers, or technology that seems to be driven by science and numbers, and literary analysis. And that also, as you know, Anna, was inspired partly because I was an internet user in the late 70s as a child. A mainframe computer was introduced to my hometown, and we were all allowed to dial into it. This was at Dartmouth College. I'll tell you more stories about that in a second. But so naturally, it was supposed to be a place for sysprogs, system programmers, to all exchange notes about whatever, about programming, but of course, turned to chat almost immediately. I mean, there is no internet communication without chat. You know, it's not like Twitter's like a late breaking way to use networked computers. It's, you know, it's fundamental to it. And so, but because in those days, it was like the 70s, and the apparatus, the kind of literary apparatus online, was very associated with Led Zeppelin, damsels, steeds, you know, every other name on the every other name on my chat room was like Apollo. I was naturally Athena. You may remember me. I was an incredibly powerful 9-year-old girl. And there was the apparatus of a game of sort of D&D. You could kill people. There was a little bit of like swords and other stuff like that, clerics. And so I came, and the reason this is relevant is I came to the internet as a game. And I've never lost the idea that fundamentally what we are doing right now, looking at each other, is playing in this case, not very massively, but a multiplayer online role-playing game, where some of us have names like Bill O. We're not called Athena, but I don't use my last name here. Other people may use other names. I've always used a ridiculously fruity name on Twitter, because I like to keep the gap between the role play and the me as big as possible. I don't want to live in the uncanny valley. I want to we are teddy bears, and then there's something else back here, instead of we are almost real people in the metaverse. I prefer to think that these are avatars and that we're back here, but that is just a habit of mine that came to me from early days on the internet. When I finished my PhD, I started to write about television for Slate, and that became, especially with reality television, became a wonderful way to think also about the uncanny, and also about realist representations of existence, and a nice blur there. There's some like wonderful, weird consequences for journalism writing about reality TV for the New York Times. One thing I've actually meant to mention to Jay Rosen is that so when you talk about real people in the New York Times, you use honorifics like Ms. and Mr. and sometimes Doctor. But when you talk about characters in a reality show, are they Ms. and Mr., or are they like the way you talk about characters in literature, like Lolita, right? First names, or whatever the author calls them. So I really, really wanted to just call them by their first names, because I thought these are being created as characters. I don't want to put their last name in there when they're on Fox's show Wife Swap, because it will dog them forever, and the editing and stagecraft is not their own. So this is Lolita I'm writing about. But then what do you do with Cokie Roberts? Then what do you do with Tucker Carlson? Then what do you do with these really hammed up performative characters that appear in the news, which borrows so much from reality television? So I started to sort of get into this territory where, once you show up on television, and any of us who've done news spots know this, much of the time you're spending in makeup and blocking, basically, not talking about what the subject is. And at some point you just are like, this is called acting. And these are not, there is should be a bright line between the reality of your life and the life you live in the burgeoning metaverse. So then
I remember Truman Show. Truman Show was one of these emblematic movies in the mid to late 90s, right? When people first experienced the camera turning on themselves, right?
Yeah.
Because at that point you had to jump up and down behind some reporter if you wanted to be on TV, or you actually had to get famous or achieve something, bake America's biggest cookie, and then you could go on television. And then this paranoia started, which today we take so much for granted. We don't even think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my only problem with the moment of the Truman Show convulsed in the culture was we need to get back to a time of pure reality. A time where, and I've been reading about some of the anxiety around mirrors that, and also like Asian screens that and veils have always kind of terrified us, that your real identity shouldn't be mediated by a screen, and that mirrors themselves, have some supernatural something to them that we should be anxious about. I mean, some idea that we were never acting way back then, and we were never playing to the cameras or the social life. I mean, the 20th century emphasis on cultivation of certain personality is, that all these self-help books were like, how are you making sales and shaking hands and remembering people's names? I mean, the avatar is the digital equivalent of that. I mean, your personality was you in social space. Now we have an avatar in digital space, but I'm not sure that there's ever going to be a moment where we ban all this and we finally get back to the good, perfect times where we were, sitting in nature, reading Kant in a book, and we had no end of attention span. I'm not sure that time ever existed. But just to finish the career trajectory, while I was writing in the beginning of the 21st century, while I was writing at the New York Times, about reality television mostly, I became interested in online video. And I called it internet television, and I created a folder on my desk called Internet Television when I saw this parody of The Shining. Do people remember that? It was like a trailer for The Shining that made it look like a feel-good movie. And I thought it was so clever, and it was on my computer.
Family in the hotel, and it's like winter, and it's
and it has Salisbury Park, and they were like,
I remember that,
yeah. The father and son were like, it was a beautiful family film. And I thought that, every now and then something like this would appear on our computers, and we would download it with great buffering efforts. And I, as the television critic at the New York Times, would be the person to take over reviewing all of it. I even proposed to Bill Keller, the editor-in-chief, that we host on New York Times site, because we had good bandwidth, all online video that appeared online. Because why not? I only had seen 2 or 3 examples of it. And then YouTube appeared, and it was like everyone, all their whole lives had been waiting to upload video. And we had broadband and video and so on. But at that point, they hired me at the Times Magazine to write a column on internet culture. And, a lot of explainers, a lot of stuff like Twitter, an online microblogging platform, or he sent a communique on Twitter That was my favorite. You couldn't say tweet forever, much less tweeted. Communiques, short form communique. It was great. And then I left and gone on, and now I'm largely at Wired, but with a long detour that I just wrote about into extremely earnest political writing in the form of op-eds, because I became monomaniacally focused, like so many of us, on just one single goal, which was getting Trump out of office. I did promise myself that if he were ever out of office, I would return to a broader range of interests. So I'm very happy to get to—
You're doing pottery again, aquarelle painting, all those things are back in your life.
I don't know about painting and quantum and other aspirations, but I feel like I have broader margins now. I'm not like policing every experience to be sure that it's on the right side. I just wrote about an experience in 2016, right after the election, of being confronted with this skinhead on the subway right at my first trip out of my house after Trump's election. And there'd been swastikas, I don't know if anyone's in Brooklyn, but swastikas painted on the playground near my house. My son wears a yarmulke, so that was very disturbing. And and then I ran into this skinhead on the subway who was smoking and doing chin-ups and then yelling anti-Hispanic slurs at some girls sitting there, and there were some Hasidim, and he was also yelling at them. Anyway, I took a picture of him and I brought it to a lunch, and I said, and you can see that the picture of the guy is on my Substack. I showed it to a friend that I was having lunch with, and my friend said, "He's hot." And from that minute on, I decided that people were either enablers of skinheads and right-wing lunatics, or they who admired them or thought they were funny when they said anti-woke stuff, or were otherwise
like a Susan Sontag moment. Like, she would totally get this.
It was such right.
The eroticization of fascism.
Exactly. Like the BDSM person bourgeois women are supposed to have like a secret kink for, or whatever. I went totally solemn. I couldn't entertain the idea that someone would think this person, was attractive or funny or interesting. I didn't want to spend any time mulling over what does the white working class want that they would elect Trump. I just was single-minded, and I'd never been so earnest in my life. I'm still very glad that I spent time doing that. But, there are times when you have scarce resources, emotional and otherwise, and you need to like parse them out, or like be really frugal. And then there are times where you have a little bit more emotional and aesthetic bandwidth. And so after those 5 years from 2016 to 2021, I had resolved that I would write about other stuff. So now I just closed a piece about nuclear fusion for Wired, and come on, fusion. I mean, there's nothing more exciting and fun to think about than like crashing atoms together to form new atoms. By the way,
always looking for the easy topic, no?
Yes.
Virginia, I'm here to write about lifestyle, like fusion.
Well, fusion though, okay, just one fun fact, and then I'll let you direct things, Anna. But I don't know, did anyone know that? Okay, so fission, its byproduct is radioactive waste. Carbon, I mean, oil and gas, their byproduct is carbon. But the only byproduct of nuclear fusion is helium. In short supply already, more balloons when we have the endlessly renewable source of fusion. I'm daring to dream. I'm gonna love fusion like I've never had my fusion heart broken before. And I recommend you do the same, because glimmers of hope in this world are few.
I love this so much. I feel like of course, it's very hard to, after listening to somebody for 10 minutes and then maybe having read up on the topic beforehand, it's really hard to like summarize these things. But it feels to me that your career so far has been this series of awakening about how different mediums work, and then also awakening to the very grave kind of structural effects in society that they might cause. And I would love to stop for a moment to hear from people. Hi, Kristen. Kristen is back. More writers. Yay. I would love to hear from you guys in the room. What were your awakenings when it comes to television, when it comes to the internet? I think, we rarely think about these moments, but when we stop to think, they come up. Before you guys joined us in the waiting room or the green room, Virginia and I were talking about Wikipedia. I explained to her how my best friends when I was a kid were dictionaries and encyclopedias. I had CD-ROMs with different encyclopedias on them, and then I would just like live on them. And they were almost like the internet, like they had hyperlinks and the whole logic was there.
Yeah, they were great.
So when I finally got Wikipedia, I was just like, of course. Like to me, this like it was seamless. Like obviously I want to move into an encyclopedia and then just live there from now on. It was like a no-brainer. It's like a library, but without all the dust and the noisy heating. It's great. But it's not always so seamless for people, especially if you come from the messaging part of or the gaming part of the internet. Anybody here would like to share? Give us some background of like which internet generation you belong to, and tell us your story briefly. Hand raise function is your friend. If you go to reactions, you will find it there.
I love early internet stories. And the fact that you came to it as an encyclopedia, I think probably inflects how you use the internet, same way that it inflects how I use it when I think of it as a game. When people think of it as an engine for self-promotion, God bless everyone, we all have to do it. That seems like, another way that you might think and also become anxious about the internet on those terms. My mother, when she tried to get me to stop using the computer, put down screens in the 70s and 80s, would say, "Stop playing the computer. That's just what you were doing on the computer." I also was tying up the family's one phone line, but and they could break my connection simply by picking up another extension. So it was nice to get the warning.
Amazing. Do you think that the origins, maybe we'll find out tonight, maybe what brings us there first is going to be the underlying theme of our existence on the internet? And maybe, I distinctly remember the moment in 2007, 2008, when Facebook turned into this self-promotion machine. And I grew up in fame. I grew up with famous parents, and I was intimately familiar with tabloid media and people waiting outside your car or your house and following you around.
You had famous Hungarian parents, Anna. I think you need to tell us.
I have a very famous Hungarian mother, yes. And this was at the time when there was one TV channel. So if you were on Saturday nights, everybody knew you. But I remember when that became everybody's and what that meant. And I do think that people who were, my parents do TV. And I do think that, people who understood TV very deeply immediately got that.
Yeah.
Like immediately got social media.
Yeah.
I told you, I think on our Twitter spaces that I have this thought experiment that I run when I don't know what somebody's real job is, because they have some fancy nonsensical 21st century name for their jobs, and I'm like, nobody does that really. What do you really do? And then I have this general suffrage adjusted Victorian, like I imagine it like a Richard Scarry town where everybody does something in the Victorian era, and I imagine this person doing like 1860, and then immediately like Mark Zuckerberg has a mustache and he's the newspaper man, and then what he really does is take advertising money and turn it into content. Period. Yeah,
that's actually really
interesting. Elon Musk is like, the inventor who makes toys on the side to like be more interesting.
I'm about to give a talk on David Graeber in a couple of nights, and I don't know if anyone's read Bullshit Jobs, but that book is a really great analysis of, I'm glad people have read it. It's just such a good analysis of.
We've both read it and done it, Virginia.
We've read it and done it, but the jobs where the people who have them don't know what they do and why they do it. And corporate law actually is like the number one on the list. Accountants is on the bubble. I thought that was interesting because I am a fan of accounting. I think it's really a great form, and I disagree with Graeber that shouldn't count.
Sarah, you had your hand up, and we would love to hear your origin story and how that might still define. I mean, clearly at some point early on in your internet career, you made it to amazing conversations on the internet, and now you're here with us tonight. Tell us how it started.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I just don't think of myself as that way. I had a father who was an early adopter of computers in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And he had one of those little Timex weird plastic things and was trying to teach me BASIC when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But and when it came to actual internet stuff, I really couldn't figure out email for the longest time. And I still don't really use Twitter at all. I have not been able to figure it out. I love Instagram. That's about it. But I feel like I started coming to the internet at the same time that I really learned how to use a library, like an actual library.
Huh.
And how to go into the stacks and all that kind of stuff. And so it's sort of concurrent, and I was frustrated that the internet wasn't that, so that, and when the pandemic hit, I found it very interesting that a lot of, I was forced to kind of go into the internet and figure out how it was like a library and how I could do research by finding the weird places that had books scanned that, I wouldn't find anywhere else or anything like that. I don't think that's exactly the kind of communication that you're talking about, but.
No, I think that is, I mean, that's close. The idea of coming to it like a library makes a lot of sense. There can be a sort of Faustian horror or something where you're if you're at a time in your life where you have the fantasy that you want to be able to read every book, then
I think about Faust every day. This is eerie. Oh no.
Really? But I just feel like at some point I looked at Google and was like, how Gary Kasparov, when Deep Blue beat him, he just said, I didn't lose exactly, I lost the will to play. And I feel like sometimes when I think of an original idea, I put it into Google, a million people have thought of it and made hay of it, and also it's dated and whatever. I just slightly lose the will to play. I'm just I can never get out in front of this thing. The way that people are feeling with the new chatbot, the new AIs, just why even try to write an essay,
I mean, I hope that we turn these things into tools as opposed to sources of despair.
Yeah. I mean, but I like the idea of coming to it as a library or an encyclopedia. I mean, because games and chat were my first experience, I sometimes think that it's the internet is a chat engine with a big, heavy knowledge base around it, or that the important part is the Talmudic notes on the major stuff, and those notes go on say Twitter. But I know that the major—
I have Talmud and the internet behind me, so I'm
perfect. Wait, Bill, were you going to talk about your early experience? I love those stories.
Hey, I was a UVA grad, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Charlottesville native. I studied English as an undergrad, Yeats and the Irish Literary Renaissance.
At UVA?
No.
Oh.
But I was at UVA studying interactive media development in the early 90s.
Oh, wow.
And built my first website in 1994, and it ended up in Wired magazine. So just as a little blurb. But yeah, I was a pre-web internet guy, and it's funny because the intersection of storytelling and technologies is what I was so fascinated by. Was this, the communities you would see online. It's your point, Virginia, that every idea that you thought you had that was so original, you find it out there. Yeah, that's always been the case out there, and it's very humbling. But I do believe each of us has something unique regardless, even if there is that sense. But anyways, I think the internet's an amazing thing, despite how dark so much of it has gotten. I think I'm seeing elements of the old internet and things like Mastodon and platforms like this. So it's good to see that starting to reemerge again.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think that, I like the Mastodon interface and vibe a lot so far. It feels I mean, I think I said to you, Anna, the other day, well, Bill, you might have had this too, since you were on the internet pre-web and probably pre-Pix maps, right? Like before the Mac interface.
Yep.
And when you could see into like the soul of the internet with the like black background and the phosphor letters, and maybe actually Sarah on your father's computer. But you then felt like it just got a makeover and became smiley. I mean, it was so not smiley in the 70s,
Right.
you know, when we like it somehow the 70s and 80s, when it seems like things are bad on the internet right now, it's
Right.
almost possible that they're also too friendly. Like it was a reaction to the like friends and likes and smiles and, you know, hello world or whatever Mac was supposed to say to you, that
Right.
things got really dark because we were like less close to the machine. And with Mastodon, it feels a little bit like just not that same condescending, you know, and Mastodon makes me feel happy that way, that we might be able to establish our own instances and feel like we're back in a driver's seat, you know, feel like we're not in a self-driving car, but like we have access to a gear shift, you know, at least that much.
It's funny, I after my master's, I went and worked at AOL through the 90s. And I kind of remember, and I remember Ted DeLeontis saying, what was it? AOL will become the Carnival Cruise Line of the internet. And I think he meant it as sort of a vision. And I was like, oh my God, what a fucking horror show that would be.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be actually right. So there you go. Anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Mastodon feels like 2003. Like I went to Mastodon when the whole paranoia, I told you this, Virginia, when this whole Elon paranoia was going on. And in our team, our Gen Z colleagues were like, Twitter is over, flee, grab your passport and your laptop and like flee. I was like, okay. And then I went to Mastodon, which I had given up on earlier. And then I found myself like sweating, and it was like 2 hours to set up a profile. And I was like, oh my God, I'm back in college. This is exactly how the internet used to feel. It was clunky and difficult, and it was overheating and annoying. And you felt like you're like building the first ever like tent, humans like inventing the tent. That's how it felt. And now, I don't, does it make us nicer? Are we like
there's something
hardworking like barn raising community now because it's more difficult? How does that work?
I think there was some like joke on Mastodon about like the 3 steps to getting to Mastodon. And the first one was like, this is so confusing. I don't understand an instance. I don't want to do it. I just want Twitter back. And then the second one was like something about sort of trying. And the third one was like, I've started 5 instances and I'm inviting people, you know, just like, because I think that once you're sweating in it, you have like
server. Yeah. Like what's where are people talking
what's a server and instance and how can I follow people? But I think once a little sweat is in it, and this is how it is like the early internet, you feel like you've got equity in the project.
Right.
And where Twitter denies us all the feeling of equity in the project, even though those of us who tweet all the time are, you know, collectively in huge numbers, the heart of Twitter, that, you know, without which it's nothing. But then suddenly we're now expected to, I mean, why we all decided it was a great time to give away a ton of content, I don't know, except that it is like extremely fun to talk about ideas, history, and the news with people in a giant forum. Like that's my explanation for why I do Twitter.
Love it. We love the chatter. I love this one sentence. I mean, I love a lot of things in the Graeber Wengrow book, and I know, Virginia, that you're a big fan. It's behind me. There's this one little paragraph in it where they talk about how neuroscientific research shows that humans are not able to hold a thought for more than 7 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some extreme geniuses, like I'm sure Einstein was able to think about rolling balls, you know, of space-time for longer than 7 seconds. But what humans need is an interlocutor, because if we're talking, we can keep the idea in our heads forever.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such an amazing part of the book, and especially great for a co-written book. Absolutely. That it's like a defensive dialogue.
Yeah, and you feel like they did keep this idea in their heads forever, because the book.
Yes, exactly, exactly. A long really co-written book. Yeah, it's a defensive dialogue as the way to hold a thought in your head. And anyone who's like been on Twitter during very difficult to assimilate breaking news knows that collective making of meaning, there's something like very exciting about that creative collaboration.
I love this. Thank you so much, guys. You're giving our hopes back in both Mastodon and Twitter. It's a world of coexistence. Why can't we have both? Why do I need to choose? Nick, you have your hand up. Do you have a video?
Unfortunately, and I've been trying this. I really.
You just have an amazing accent. We'll take it.
Okay. This tells you what internet generation I am. I can't switch my camera on, and I don't understand how to do it. And I've called my son in.
That isn't
who's
you.
19.
Call me.
And he can't do it either. So my apologies. I might go on my phone in a minute because my phone does work, and then you can see me. I was thinking about the origin story, and I was also thinking about what Virginia just said about why do we give away this content? Okay. And I hadn't thought about this, I have to say, until you just asked. And I'm sorry, as you know, I'm very old, and I can remember most of my life there wasn't any internet. Probably the first thing I did when the internet arrived was I built a little website and I published on it a song that I'd written. Okay. And when I thought about that, I thought, but hang on a second, before the internet, well before the internet, when I was 11 and 12 years old, I would write little songs and record them on a cassette machine. Yeah. And the one consistent thread throughout all this is I still do that. I don't do that to communicate to other people. I do it for myself. And
I want to talk about this, Nick, but
the reason why we give away content for free, the reason why I give away content for free, and I will put that phrase in inverted commas, is if I do that, it's a way of testing that I actually exist.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I could give you lots of other stories about my awakening moments, but that kind of creativity, which is probably deeply something that human beings do, they will always do, and they will do it whether anybody's listening or not, and they will do it in whatever medium is easiest to do it in.
I don't know if
that helps.
Yeah, no, it's really useful. I don't know if anyone remembers though, one Yom Kippur years ago, Mark Zuckerberg felt that he had made mistakes with, it was one of his many mea culpas for mistakes at Facebook, and he wrote this apology on Facebook. It's actually a really interesting, weird document, but he says, that he's sorry that he made mistakes. I can't remember exactly the details, but it ends with, may you be inscribed in the book of life, right? The Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah well wishes. And clearly Facebook wants to be a book of life, and being inscribed in that book is a privilege. It means I existed, the same thing Nick says. I think the impulse to use, we don't have to say that the impulse to use Facebook, Twitter, or, God forbid, the whole internet is intrinsically terrible. There's we want to be counted and seen and inscribed in the book of life. I will say I got off Facebook right after that, but
can I just say two things about that, if I may? One is, I was on LinkedIn the other day and a message popped up saying, why don't you wish Chantal a happy birthday? Because it's her birthday today. And I thought, but Chantal's been dead for 10 years. Okay. And that's a kind of sobering moment, which sort of plays against what you've just said. Yeah, we think if we're in the book of life, we are immortal. Well, the way we think about life, if somebody's died and we know that they've died and the machine is telling us that they haven't. This happened to me actually a couple of years ago. I had this book which I picked up in a second-hand bookshop many years ago. It's one of my favorite books. I couldn't find it in the house, so I looked on the internet and there was no record of it anywhere at all. Did I imagine it? Did it even exist? And it was a very kind of anxious and tense moment. And then a few weeks later, I did actually find the book in the attic, which was good, but those are kind of strange moments, I think, where you come up against I don't know if reality is the right word, but your assumptions about how real the internet is tested, I think.
That's so true. I have a former classmate that I can't stalk. She's just not to be found online. I mean, did I mention her for like years?
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah, I have a
we
couple
expect
friends
the
like
internet
that.
to be an inventory. It's like
People are allowed,
it's
but
just
in
like
real life,
the room of requirement.
people are allowed to disappear.
Sorry, Nick,
And
we
actually,
can
it's
hear you
very
very
easy for
badly.
people to disappear in real life.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Is that better? Yeah,
It's
sorry.
a little bit
I'm on a
better.
microphone as well. People have the right to disappear, and in real life, up until recently, it's been pretty easy to disappear. You move to another town, nobody hears of you again.
Well,
So
we do and don't. We do
why
and
do we
don't
expect
want to
them to?
disappear. That's like, I think that this is like for many of us just an internal struggle that the internet has made clearer. I mean, often it's your most preening time on the internet where you clearly wanted to be seen that you now regret and want to not be seen. You know, it's not surveillance cameras so much as like one's own maybe mistakes. Jay, do you have your hand up?
I do. Can you hear me? All right.
Yeah.
I wanted to respond to your internet origins invitation. I was famous in my family for being a kid who literally read the encyclopedia. I would read the encyclopedia for hours and hours. S was the best letter, by the way, except for K, because K, you could get the Kennedy assassination, which I read like that article like 20 times. But the reason I'm saying that is that for a kid who read the encyclopedia, reread it endlessly, if I had the internet when I was a kid, I cannot imagine what would have happened to me. Because the encyclopedia, for all its greatness, was incredibly limited.
Right.
I just think my whole life would have been different. But this was my origin with the internet. It was the same year, really, that the web broke into the history of the internet. 95, which is the year, I think, where the browser and the web sort of came together, especially in journalism. Almost all the big news organizations went online around 95 or maybe 96. Anyway, I had a research assistant and then at that time who asked me a question that I didn't know an answer, which is, are you on the internet? And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, what do you mean on the internet? Like, how do you get on it? And she says, well, do you have an email account? I said, I don't know. What's email? And she says, you know what? I bet you have an email account. Let's take a look. And she knew something about NYU's proto-internet at that moment. So she managed to use my credentials to log in to the internet for the first time for me. And she said, there's this thing, email works like regular mail. And she says, let's see if they set up your email account. And she said, yes, you're JR3 at nyu.edu, which means I'm the third JR in NYU history to join the internet, which is, my students love that idea because they're like BBK 1024, right? In the system. Anyway, we managed to find my my email account and open it up. And I had 3 messages, and the messages are from people I knew in college, wondering if I'm on the internet.
Wow.
So like one of them was like, hey, Jay, are you there? It's the future, right? And Jay, we want you on the internet. And just this idea that there was this network where people were trying to find me and sending out a message without any knowledge that it would be received, almost like you would send a message in a bottle or something like that, or broadcast out to, the universe that, hey, I'm here, and it was just so romantic, this idea of people trying to reach me, not knowing if I would ever connect. that I fell in love with the internet instantly.
That is
Just
super
from that.
cool. And these crazy stories, some of them heartbreaking, some of them great, of people discovering relations on 23andMe or what, genetic relations, and then
Yes.
inevitably going to Facebook, just
To
and
find them.
like showing up. It's yeah, and sending out signals to people. So were your two friends like pretty techie?
I didn't think
New
of them
apps.
as
Like there's a
that, but they
there's
were
a
ahead of
Let's
me.
Die Together app, where if you're, I think you can only connect to it if your battery is on 3%, and it will connect you to somebody who's also 3%. It's called Let's Die Together, or some other very dramatic name. And you can like have like a quick chat with somebody, and it's very ephemeral.
Together. That is very, very funny. And like someone probably had a great time programming that. I didn't even know how available your battery information was at any given time. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I find very romantic. And also those, before there's like any kind of social audio or what we're doing now, if you were a writer, you instantly had some new skills, right? Because your communication was easier, even than people, some people who are great on the phone and like salesy and great, they did a different thing, and their heyday, kind of waned, right? After email and then chat and all these other things. The this and the like breathing in smoke and late night conversations. But so you would discover, I felt like I had some very smart friends. And when they wrote me emails, I was suddenly like, I hadn't put together that this person is not a very literate person. They're just like not great at email, but then some people would surprise you. I mean, the whole reason that I liked the internet from the beginning is that I was 9. I didn't feel like I was like, it wasn't very impressive in any conversation I really wanted to be having. But on the internet, nobody knew I was a dog, and nobody knew I was a pre-adolescent. And I could talk about Reaganomics, Dartmouth lacrosse, really important issues of the day that no one took me seriously on. Come on, Reaganomics. I needed to weigh in. We all did. Trickle down. It's never going to work. In the public space on the thing. So great. And then other people coming back with like,
You
no,
were born for Twitter. You were born for Twitter.
What's that?
You were born for Twitter. You were tweeting before Twitter even existed. You were like, Reaganomics, boo, sad, never going to work.
The trending topic was trickle down that day. There were so many things on that conference XYZ that are apparatus that exists still on Twitter. But also you could make reply all mistakes. Really early lesson of my social world when I was 10 or something was accidentally doing RA, reply all, instead of replying to one person. It goes out into the whole thing, and of course had gossip about other people. But these are like, you go over these bumps. Also, you have to decide if you're going to be an all caps person, and there's a moment. But also, I was sort of anti-feminist by accident in the beginning, because because the girls that I used it with, we used like really squinched up lowercase letters, and even like an n dash, not an n dash, a hyphen. So hi hyphen, how are you? Just to be as like snuggly and cute as possible. And then mixed case people who skip spaces between things. Oh my God, right? You knew that they were boring and overly formal. But the fact that you can know someone from their typing style.
Tell the generation, no? Like how somebody uses the language, you know when they first got text message, when they first got email, and they still type like that.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure some of your parents also say like love mom and texts the best, right? It's like everything around it says this is coming from your mom, but they still need to sign off. Also, ASCII art.
Introduce themselves on the phone. Like, yeah, I can see. Like, I would never pick up if I don't know who you are.
Oh yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. Hey, it's your mom. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, every message in a bottle thing is really great. Every text is a mini letter. Oh, yeah, exactly. But ASCII art. Oh, by the way, so like if people care about grandma's early internet stories, before trolling, which by the way was christened in the 90s by a woman on a weddings message board, bulletin board. People were comparing notes about their weddings, and one of them said, so I had my wedding and it was black tie and the women wore periwinkle, and it was organized like this, and someone just said, that is the tackiest thing I've ever heard. And everyone in this really supportive thread was just like, what are you doing? Why are you being so cruel to Michelle? And someone came in and said, and it's a great, great long message board thing, I think what she is doing is trolling or trawling, which is what fishermen do when they drag for fish and, try to catch them or whatever. She's just trying to get a rise out of you, and you shouldn't, you should do nothing about it. So it's not actually a little troll under a bridge. It's the trawling or trolling thing that fishermen do. I loved that. But anyway, that was like an early part of the, what's it called? Meme ecology project. Trolling, before trolling, 80s, there was something called scrolling. Is there anyone who possibly remembers scrolling? Bill, do you? Where you would send someone just a bunch of ampersands so their screen would go up, because everything was write only. It would just disappear. So you would just like be in the middle of all these fun texts with your fun messages with your fun friends, and then just someone would just meanly send you all these ampersands, and then at the bottom it would say, "You've been scrolled." And you're like, "Oh, I'll get you." But the idea of like upsetting people's equilibrium on the internet also seems like really deep in its DNA.
Yeah, there's a tricksterish element to the internet like that.
The phone freaks. I mean,
I love it.
Sorry. Yeah,
No,
Steve
no.
Jobs was a phone freak.
Yes.
Steve Jobs and Wozniak, like radio contests or learning to make the sound so they could
2600, yeah, the phone freaking, those guys were awesome, and that sort of subversiveness with a sense of humor. It was the white hat hacker groups that were doing interesting, funny things and then posting their results. That stuff used to just keep me entertained for hours. So
totally.
That was lovely. Yeah.
Totally. And you would just see like somehow like a little, like later you would see like an AOL person or whatever come into something where they were over their heads. But
absolutely,
early days, well,
Yep.
in the early days, and it felt like there were always people who knew their way around way better than you did,
Yeah.
And you had to like read up thread all the time to be sure you weren't like behind on the memes. Sometimes I think people should do on Twitter, like they just roll in and you're just like, people have been talking about this thing forever, like just read up thread before you weigh in. But yeah, you could get really zapped early on.
Absolutely.
I just think that I basically like in complaints that the internet is a sewer or a cesspool, or in particular Twitter is, I just am not sure. I'm not sure that that's like a fair game way to describe a human endeavor. Like it just is, that is clearly not what a lot of Twitter is. And we're not idiots for using Twitter. And there was some day when like, Martina Navratilova and I don't know why all over Eastern Europe and Russia, but Garry Kasparov were tweeting, and or like Winston Churchill's grandson tweets a lot. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, tell me why again that this is some like brain eating trivia, like we're all just diseased for sitting here. Like this is fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Did you ever hear that story, Jack Dorsey? And that said that Twitter was analogous to, or inspiration for,
the map.
It came from police radio.
Yes, I actually,
as a kid,
I've seen Jack talk about it live. So apparently he was obsessed with maps when he was a kid. And when he learned how to code, the first thing that he coded was a dispatch system. I think it was the ambulance.
Dispatch.
New York
ambulance.
In St. Louis.
And this whole idea, about like who is where and what's happening. And what was really like, this was maybe, I have goosebumps just thinking about it, because like this whole map and the territory idea is just so interesting. And I remember the first time I went viral, the feeling that you get is that you kind of touch upon the whole map of the world. because you
Yeah.
tweet something and first it's Europe that picks it up, and then America wakes up, and then Asia wakes up, and you feel that. And now in internet, like, this is my life. Like, my entire life is about time zones and what hour is it right now somewhere else, and what happens simultaneously, what happens after one another. And this experience was first given to me by Twitter. And I remember Jack, my friend, Mr. Dorsey, talking about this at the British Library, which is where I was getting my technology information from. And this just blew my mind. Of course, it's a map.
Yeah. I love
it's
that.
like a tsunami. Every piece of news is a tsunami all across the world. That's how it acts. I think, Kristen, you had your hand up as well. Do you still have your thought?
Kristen?
Sorry, I've joined twice. I know it's super disorienting.
Oh.
No, it was vaguely unrelated. I think, I'm a little envious of all of these amazing origin stories. I'm a very young millennial, so I don't really have a very sexy origin story when it comes to the
millennial?
internet.
Are you not Gen Z?
No, I'm barely a millennial. Barely a millennial. I don't know if that's something to celebrate or not. I don't know. You tell me.
I don't know if that's the age group one wishes to. I always say, like, our generation gave the world Facebook. You're welcome.
No,
This was our contribution. And like creepy Yom Kippur messages.
I love it. Well,
there's more where that came from.
I think Facebook was my really first encounter, because I came from a place where my parents were very strict. I wasn't allowed to have a profile. I wasn't allowed to be online for a very long time. So I didn't have MySpace. I skipped over that, and Facebook was my first experience with that. And I remember it being like an interestingly emotional time where I started to learn that, kind of like what you were saying about email, Virginia, that some of my friends were so different. So I had that sort of uncanny valley experience that you were talking about in your Twitter spaces, where I was like, wow, these are two different people. And it was so odd. But that's really when I discovered myself as a writer too, because I liked who I was in text way better than I was in person. And I never was able to do that before. But then there was also, I don't know if anyone experienced this sort of, maybe there are a couple of you who were applying to colleges, but there was that time where it was like pre-cancel culture, where a lot of people were not making it into colleges because of incriminating photos. So I remember I had one photo where I was like holding a beer or something, and I couldn't get anyone to take it down, because I think whoever had posted the photo, and I'm like, oh my God, am I not going to make it into college because I had this one beer this one time,
Right.
And so that was a very intensely emotional experience, just that one photograph. So I guess that was kind of a summary of my first-ish experience.
It's fun. I mean, American parents are typically, very anxious about internet use, and try to limit the time, and basically have what look like modified sexual abstinence programs, it's just like 3 feet on the floor or 20 minutes a day or whatever it is you're allowed to use, as if the whole thing is toxic. So you must limit your exposure to the internet, whatever it is, and that like sort of metonymized as a screen. But I lived in Japan for a while and worked a little bit with Kan Ishao, who's a sociologist who's written a book on teenagers in Japan. This is a few years ago, but in Japan, the internet was read totally differently. It was that public space, name, rank, serial number, uniforms, salaried jobs, education were terrible for kids, that like kids were not getting to be free at all. They needed a place where they could use code names, where they could be non-binary in every way, where they didn't have to like show up and be counted and be regimented and so like, thank God for the internet where you could make like a lizard with the body of Marilyn Monroe as your profile, and and do all these crazy, your avatar could do all these crazy things that you couldn't do, because the imagination would be liberated in this space in a way that it never would be in a place where you couldn't talk back and you're expected to be, disciplined. And I thought that was my experience as a small child of using it, was I liked myself in this place, and I hadn't sorted out my life in physical space, and it was easier, just all the anxieties of around power and sex that have to do with bodies and space were just taken off the table for the time, and it's almost pure thought when you're just using language on those bulletin boards. And that's where some of us like to live in that place. Tons of self-invention possible. And, compared to a sports like Heffernan, get in there, don't fuck it up this time, just like the way coaches talk to you, or to people always telling you to do things differently. I was just incredibly liberated by it. Yeah. And it seemed a bit sad that 70s parents couldn't fully come to understand, or at least that kids need imaginative spaces.
They can't imagine it now.
That are you won't get into college if you put up XYZ picture. I mean, God forbid, right? That's not how you should live your childhood.
They can't imagine it now either. And to me, that's
no, I know. I mean, the
only thing I having become parents. I mean, this whole screen time limitation seems.
I know.
I think even maybe we'll figure it out, but right now I feel that even the best versions are just not good enough. And
my kids'
it's I mean, the internet is freedom, right? And when you have freedoms, you have rights and responsibilities, and you can teach that to a child.
You can teach to a child. You can also teach them better or worse or more interesting avatar creation. I mean, the things that they want to know are should I is Discord an interesting place for me? Does the talking lead it into more raucous speech? How do I deal with interruption and overlapping voices? Or, is in the old days of MySpace, MySpace is a more emo space. It's more, that might be better for people. Twitter's good for politics, but finding your way around as the same way that you would advise a friend, or you think for as they want the same thing that adults want. Should I use my real name? Should I, I mean, avatar creation is the creation of this fiction. And that's where you can show a lot of active, almost heroic imagining of what a person can be.
Right.
And, I mean, I don't think you say, well, just because you might get excluded at the dance means you never go to a dance, right? Or you might, right? There were some real subtleties that I remember my mother teaching me about social life. She was just really good at saying, she heard me once slagging off a party that I had been to a friend who hadn't been invited, because she said, oh, I wasn't invited. And I said, oh, well, it was terrible. You didn't miss anything. And my mother said, don't do that. That's just disingenuous, just a small thing. But she's anyone can see right through that. And also that it was disloyal to the friends that you had a good time with. We missed you, but next time or whatever. Small things like that. A kid just needs to learn that, and the only and you need to learn that in digital space. I mean, the idea of well, if we keep your screen time down, then that will somehow suppress the longings to be understood or connect or whatever. Seems crazy. I feel I want more CRT in schools and less screen sense or screen hygiene or whatever. It just seems terrible. It seems like reefer madness.
I mean, maybe one of the counter arguments to that would be that, dances have been the same since we started doing them around the fire outside our caves, and how you treat your friends probably has always been the same in terms of norms and what works. But the internet might have introduced something where there's just this schism between every generation and the next, where we just don't understand what the other person is going through. I always think that when parents are seemingly making bad decisions, they are making it out of fear and care. This must be something where Gen X parents are feeling extremely out of control, very scared for their kids.
It's interesting. I think when you were saying that, the issue, I think, is the difference between organic and emergent connection that happens on the internet where people find one another versus the algorithmically amplified stuff,
Yeah.
which is more problematic. And it's interesting to me because my daughter actually works in countering violent extremism and online radicalization space. She just got a master's in security studies at Georgetown, and she actually works with some folks who've been with some of the major platforms now. And it's really interesting to me to see how, did anybody see the story about Caleb Kane, the guy who was radicalized on YouTube? He lived in a trailer in West Virginia, smart kid, but found that through YouTube, basically over time, took him down these alt-right and then increasingly fascist rabbit holes. He actually works with Peril now at American University in the countering violent extremism work. Anyways, my point is that the algorithmic issue, it's funny because the early days of ads where you're trying to, promote advertisers to a selective audience, it was brute force stuff, and we did not know what the hell we were doing. It's gotten much smarter. I think marketers sell it more than they should. But there is something very toxic about having the machine turn its attention grabbing systems against you to mine you for your attention. And I think that's very, very different. So
yeah, I think that when your brain starts to feel kind of coextensive with the internet, that you and the YouTube flow, I've actually never been down a path like that.
right.
I have been, and it's really scary.
Like where it starts to dead end, it just takes you and takes you.
YouTube,
I mean,
and I want to love YouTube. Like, this is against my wishes here, what I'm going to say. Like, on YouTube, you're always one video away from endless fascist content that
Absolutely.
has been
is that true? Wow.
brilliantly compiled, created to lure you and to make you feel that you're still somehow within a sexist or even left. Like, we had Jason Stanley at an event recently, and I was just looking for. I remembered a podcast he did on before his propaganda book came out, and I was just looking for that, and I was like, Jason Stanley, Yale propaganda book podcast 2016, like something. I was trying around with that. In all cases, there was one Jason Stanley video that was completely, by the way, I could not find this anymore, the original video. And then everything else was Ben Shapiro.
Wow.
And I was like, Jason, are you aware? What's happening? And I tried different VPNs. I tried from different countries. And I think Ben Shapiro is like still one of the most benevolent of these guys. And it was really... It's so weird because if you're looking for that content, you want the algorithms to be really efficient. You don't want to spend really time fishing around. But I felt like almost my free will was violated here. Like, you know what I'm looking for. Dear YouTube, you know exactly who I am and what I'm looking for here. And you're giving me the exact opposite on purpose. And I can't think of that as something where editorial or curatorial decisions could not play a role. Stopping that. Whoever hashtags, whoever thinks together, or whatever thinks together.
Sorry, could I jump in, because I was going to ask this question anyway, but it seems like a good time to ask it. I'm sure that everybody's seen the story this week about how the Taliban have bought a blue tick on Twitter to say they're official.
Not just one, they are buying up a lot. Yeah,
they are buying up a lot. Which I think plays to Bill's question here about, well, I wondered if Virginia had any sense of that is happening. What does that mean for Twitter? It reminds me of what was happening and perhaps isn't happening now on Facebook. I once went to a presentation by an outfit called the Oxford Internet Institute. Who are,
that place is amazing.
They
do great work.
And I didn't really know much about Facebook at the time. And they just it was an exploration of how people would just go on, set up a group, pay money with no regulation at all, no testing. You just if you pay your money, you can set up a group and an advertising campaign without any kind of oversight and regulation. Now, I just wonder if this is a particular moment for Twitter, because I'm not sure if I was an advertiser, would I want to be on the same platform where the Taliban have official accounts? I don't know. I don't think I would.
That's what we hope. We hope that there are some idea of, with networks, that you know, ESG, environmental, social, governmental governance standards will be something that will continue to be something that advertisers will want to stay, you know, within the guardrails of, and don't want to be near fascist material. And I think that's mostly been borne out. YouTube is just such a strange, they're like pre-rolls. I don't really understand exactly how that all works, but I want to also propose we probably don't have that much time, but that's sort of unusual antidote to what I think of problems of disinformation online. I feel like we need more exposure to fiction labeled as fiction, so that, right, so that we understand the tropes of fiction, and so that when we see fiction labeled as fact, we understand it as shabby, thin, unvital fiction, that's, you know, not meant to expand your imagination, but contract it. And it is something that, you know, and I have this literary background, so I have a bit of a bias, but I'll tell you how this came to me. I was thinking about pre-QAnon, around the time of Pizzagate, why people would be so interested in pedophilia, like that particular hyper arousal. Like there are all kinds of sources of arousal in the world, and why that one would be so exciting that you would base so many stories around it. At the same time, I was watching this show called Broadchurch, and I was thinking, oh, what pathetic minds care about these stories. I was watching Broadchurch on Netflix or something, great British whatever mystery story, and naturally a theme of pedophilia right in the heart of it, with a murder mystery. You know, just this is one of those English murder mysteries that is made for middle-aged women, and, you know, just a like gruesome child molestation and murder in it. And I thought, we are drawn to, our systems are drawn to hyper arousing material, which is often snuff and porn, like Mondo, like movies like Faces of Death, Law and Order SVU, exactly. So like, and those are what like good viewers watch, right? And they don't do, and they don't watch QAnon materials because. So
we want the catharsis. We want the Aristotelian catharsis. We want to go through deep emotions, purging.
That's right. We want to go through deep emotions.
Safe environments, right?
In safe environments, in the confines of fiction, with some kind of release, and that doesn't make you then get a gun and take it and shoot the antagonist in the film because you've mistaken the whole thing for reality. And I think that some of the red states are culturally underserved. They don't have very interesting fictions, and so they go for this hyper arousing content online, which is also porn and snuff by another name. Like it's just too that's not how a day is supposed to feel. Fascist content is just like, it's just way too much. It's just like bringing to mind just like not even the philosophical part of it, but the imagery and the enemy is always doing terrible things to children, and it always goes further. It's like when they come down to cannibalism and sucking blood, it's like, it's like kids just trying to make a story like more and more and more appalling, like a haunted story, and so I think that the tropes of fiction, you're right, that let you suspend disbelief, this highly pleasurable way where you engage with something in an ironic way, in the sense that I know Olivia Colman is acting when she's playing the wife of the pedophile, right? And I can appreciate her performance, and I can appreciate the fact that this thing happening on the screen is not happening in reality, right? They're like pretty simple, things that you learn as part of literacy. But
it's the same as what you mentioned at the beginning with the reality show, and we see it in other ways as well, where how we started suddenly demanding much more realism from actors. For instance, if I'm Hungarian, so I wouldn't be allowed maybe to play a Polish woman, whereas 10 years
true,
ago,
and also
even know those were separate countries, or climate,
also amateur porn, or people
or languages.
Like, why would people in a time where there's like extraordinary television being made for HBO, Apple TV, Netflix, like just stuff like we've never seen stuff that's brilliant before, want to sit and listen to Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, whoever, just like yell at you from a tiny box with bad resolution?
About
You know?
horse medicine.
I think, I'd like to challenge you a bit there, Virginia.
Yeah.
I think that is a, well, how can I put this delicately in a way that won't offend? I completely understand why people want that kind of material. Not everybody, frankly, there are still people, a lot of people in the West who can't even read, you know? And therefore that kind of sensation is something that they are attracted to. And I actually agree with you. I think one of the problems we have at the moment is, people can't actually, don't seem to be able to distinguish fiction, what's real and what isn't. But that's a problem that runs very deep, and it's not something which the internet has enabled, partly, but it's also about the fact that, politics and advertising and messaging have all been about narratives and stories. And this idea that when you're a politician, what you do is, rather than doing things, you tell a story, and that's how you do things. And that, I think, is a much wider kind of cultural debate around why that has happened. But I don't think the answer to a culture which is hooked on bad stories is to tell good stories. I think the answer is to interrogate the very idea of the story, our assumptions about stories, what we are told about stories and how they work. We should be not just consuming more great Netflix content, but, I watch a lot of Netflix content and they've got the Netflix style down to a T. But I often, when I watch it, think I'm in a bubble here in a way that I didn't used to be when I was watching straightforward terrestrial television. The answer is not, please, let's have no more stories. We don't need more stories, good or bad ones.
I don't think that's what Virginia said, by the way. She didn't say we don't want more stories. She actually called for more good quality fiction. Actually, Interact just proposed this partnership to Substack that we want more fiction and that we are very happy to start a competition and call for more short fiction pieces and curate and help judge anything. So we are absolutely here for it. By the way, Nick, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but Nick has a career in television. So I think our notions are somewhat, colored by the mediums that we arrive from. But it's true that the norms around televised narratives have changed greatly. I remember.
Sorry, Anna, I do have to correct you. I don't have a career in television. I did have worked for the BBC for a long time. Television is the one part of the BBC I've never worked for, and I am no expert. Indeed, it's the one media that I would say I do not understand how it works or what it does.
I like your point, but I think a lot of people, including the Oxford Internet Institute, agree with you that we need to interrogate the ideas of story and make clear the difference between reality and propaganda, but including science, but and that's why I said it's a little bit far-fetched what I'm proposing, but I do think that there is, in the history of television, there's a moment in the day that got replaced with internet content, and that moment was soap opera content and game shows. And because I've always seen the internet as either
daytime and late night TV shop, these two things.
Soap operas were a perfect example, and a lot of the Yoganon crowd, would have been in the age group to watch, the people that went from yoga and wellness in the pipeline to right-wing QAnon stuff. They're sitting ducks, our foremothers were for Guiding Light and All My Children. with the
Right.
same kind of excitement about characters and what they were going to do, and then these crazy like sleights of hand, but you have like an audience schooled in irony to understand it's not happening. I mean,
Right.
the like classic thing of, someone walking by the TV screen and being like, oh, that Erica Kane, oh,
Right.
look at her, she's doing that thing, right? Playing into your moral universe. Well, also you have these, you have you've been sort of practiced in a way to appreciate that content without also going crazy. And they're like a great novel, Misery, Stephen King's novel Misery, but there are other novels too where people start to believe quixotically in the content of what they're reading. But those are the exceptions that prove the rule. Most of us don't mistake this stuff for reality. Then you replace it with QAnon, which, there are the threads of an okay story in there. If you could cast it and, make some sense of it, but it's just shoveled to you as kind of news or something. It's very hard to sort
Right.
out, and it doesn't have any of the machinery of fiction that puts the mind, gives the mind some structure to understand it. So I think rather than imagining that people are going to want to endless fact checks and that they want to give up the pleasure of stories and fiction, letting people at least have the option of more fictional content, especially in the red states. It is incredible because Duck Dynasty was the #1 show in most of the states that went for Trump in 2016, a reality show. I'm not talking about, I don't think that it has to be more prestige or more anything, but I'd love for us to be getting any kind of more fiction. Tom Clancy,
Yes.
airport thrillers, it just fiction. It's just good for
It's
the
hard to
soul.
publish fiction these days. If you talk to any writer, I mean, you writers here must know that it's very, very hard to get fiction published.
Right.
These days.
Which is wild. I feel like we are due for a
We have fiction
revolution. And
writers
actually,
here. Sorry, I don't want to
yeah,
speak
no,
for you.
no, it's fine. And actually, I've had this idea for a long time. I'm not sure this might already have been executed, but I don't know if it has at a higher level. But I would love to see characters who come online in a very real way, like characters who have Instagram profiles, who have Twitter. So it's like there are physical beings in the universe who are in also maybe someone has written a novel, but then those beings are co-working in the real
Right.
space on Twitter and Instagram. I think that would be an interesting bridge that we haven't done.
I think some fictional podcasts play around with that a little bit.
Yes.
Sometimes they don't, like, they look exactly like a true crime story.
Mhm.
And I haven't yet developed a taste for fictional podcasts, but they sometimes, like, you have to read down in the description until it finally is like, with Julia Roberts and blah, blah, blah. And then you're finally like, oh, it's fiction. It takes a while. Some of them, they're like trying to sort of batten on the difference. Because obviously you're supposed to live in this flicker when you're reading fiction. You don't want it to be, you're not being tricked exactly.
Right.
But you're in a game with rules, I mean, I don't have
the internet is the ultimate choose your own adventure story, right? It kind of begs to have that. There were some attempts, I think, at writing a choose your own adventure story for the internet.
Yes, I think there have been attempts. I'm just surprised that it turns out to be fascist content currently. That's the current snuff porn. Like, there's all kinds of hyper arousing forms, and
I think the draw of fascist content to me seems to be because people feel so disempowered. It's a way for people to feel some sense of agency. And it's funny because, and I've been thinking a lot about, I love your idea, Kristen, by the way, of things physically manifesting on the web somehow. That's such a weird inversion. I'm going to have to ponder that for a bit. But I think it was Douglas Rushkoff who called QAnon, and I don't want to misattribute this, so it may not have been him, but QAnon was like the greatest group crowdsourced creation of fiction ever. And the idea is that there's a participatory aspect of it too, that where you get to be both the creator and potentially the hero in parts of the story. So again, that sort of feeds that empowering narrative as well. And it's part of why I think it's such a draw. Anyways, sorry.
No. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, if anyone was on Twitter during the nights, the Succession appears on HBO, second, third, fourth season, whatever it is coming up. People have, little ways that you integrate yourself into the story. It's not quite like, I just remember someone came up with, maybe this is a meme that has happened with other works of art, but, name yourself in the episode last night. Have you seen this? It's like, I am the batteries that Kendall threw out on this way out of it, whatever that was. Just marvelous details, like, I am Shiv when she, first discovers that whatever. And I think that's something of the same, the collective meaning making that happened with QAnon.
Right.
I profiled someone, or interviewed someone, wrote a piece about someone who went to January 6th and had been radicalized via QAnon, a yoga type, and in Brooklyn. And he said he had just never felt more connected and more love than in processing the Q drops, and I don't know exactly what to do with that, right? Like, to us, you see it and you're like, oh, this is going in horrible directions. But I think people started yelling, we love Trump, not build a wall, not whatever, but like this love penumbra that suddenly they were in. So it's got to make you feel good in some way to interact with that concept.
I think Bill's point is a really good point. And it doesn't actually surprise me that we're in a moment where fascist content is, popular. That kind of thing is popular when people feel powerless, as Bill said, and people are powerless because of things going on in the economy and in politics, where they feel powerless. I mean, in the 30s, that happened. And I mean, it's like you can always tell when humanity's confused and down and doesn't know what to do. People suddenly become really interested in UFOs because UFOs give you a meaning, just like conspiracy theories give you a framework to look at the world, which gives your life meaning and feels as though it gives you power. And of course, because the internet is largely started out as a completely unregulated space, when people can pretty much still say whatever they like, and it's very light touch, that means that those kind of ideas can spread very quickly, and it's too late to challenge them. And I think Bill makes a really, really good point there about this. We are in a particular kind of economic moment, political moment. And one of the things that kind of irritates me a little is people don't stand back and say, not just, oh my God, Trump's awful, and oh, he's a terrible liar. They don't ask, but why is he so popular? Why is he so loved? What is it he's doing? What is he picking up on? He's picking up on something that other people aren't really picking up on, and he's leveraging it to make himself very rich.
Well, to be fair, he's not all that popular now that he's a one-term, twice impeached president who's out.
But there are still people who
lost in 2020. I mean, those might have been mistakes that were made in those Trump years, but it is interesting that there's some line from Winnicott that we have to remember that sometimes the catastrophe we're most afraid of is the one that's already happened. And that is to some extent how I feel about the description, just to get back into, well, we're in the rise of QAnon. No, we're at the tail end of QAnon. And Trump's been out of office for 2 years. I remember being in New York in the 90s, and every performance artist would be like, we need no more years of Reagan Bush. And someone sitting next to me was like, Clinton's been the president for 3 years. Just like we can hang on forever and keep thinking that Trump's a problem, but I think it looks pretty bleak for him in 2024. But Nick, I take your point as a general point that there was obviously something afoot in the world, whether it's a conversation between real world phenomena like the economy and nationhood and or whether these things are all created as a consequence of interacting with the internet. I'm not sure. Biden lives very much in the real world. He's just like pouring regular money into a war an actual ground war in Ukraine to try to help the Ukrainians. And he's sent us checks. And, you know, he's not really an internet president. He's a throwback. And I think that reassertion of reality in Biden's presidency is going to have really interesting effects on us.
I'm very interested in the idea that, you know, Trump may be gone. I'm saying this is one of the resident Europeans in the room, you know, that Trump may be gone, but Trumpism isn't. And what interests me deeply, I mean, as a hobby historian, is how there always is pop culture, and pop culture is always an antithetical to what it thinks the mainstream culture is. And then that, you know, in an era of really bland, semi-lefty, kind of old-fashioned establishment, it kind of is logical that one of the main pop cultural trends that spreads virally would be from the right, and that would have reactionary elements. This was, as Nick said, it was very much so in 1930s Germany, when you had really, really deep economic and moral crises. You had a very frivolous, ineffectual left-wing establishment that we know from Cabaret, you know, Isherwood stories. And then you have the reactionary, but this does not have to get out of hand, right? It can be healthy. I think Germany is probably an outlier in this case. But
yeah, I mean, I've written a bunch about the differences between Weimar and, I mean, there's this like pocket causality about like hyperinflation, fascism. That's what happens because people feel powerless. Don't know why hyperinflation necessarily makes people feel powerless, but hyperinflation, powerlessness, fascism. It's just a pipeline. There's no way out of it. And so when Trump is elected here, we were like, but things were going well, right? It wasn't 2015, in spite of Trump's effort to make it seem like was all carnage, was like a prosperous year for the economy. This was not right after 2008. And so it's harder to draw that line. But I think, Anna, you're right that, as Steve Bannon says, we're the counterculture now, that there may have been something like more tedious and also more cathedral-like about the Obama years than some of us picked up on. And it like they felt like throwing rocks at it, you know, and whatever economic threads they were connecting. You know, you hear people say, well, no one was arrested in the 2008 crisis or stuff like that, but it quickly takes on a life of its own, right? Like the arguments, you know, I think Mark Zuckerberg said no one was influenced by what they saw on Facebook. It was the lived conditions of their lives. But our lives are spent so much online that it really is hard to identify like some kind of, you know, true rubber hits the road reality. And that's what determines existence, as opposed to these overlapping stories.
So many quotable lines. I love that this is being recorded. Before we wrap up, can I have just one last cheeky outro question to you, Virginia? You said something, I think it was your third sentence tonight, and I've been meditating on it ever since, and I was looking for a moment to ask. So if you were a fact checker in 1993, and we spent most of the past 5 years worrying about fact checking or where it's going, is it really, or what are alternative facts, and is there truth, you know, like all these very continental things, intimately familiar to me as a former continental philosophy student. How did fact checking work in 1993? Do you have anecdotes for us? Was it like you had to call people?
Oh, it was the best.
Was like, did you like dial like this? Like, do you have like
it was the best.
Really old-fashioned stories that we can kind of like munch upon after the song?
So someone would describe the wallpaper somewhere, and if it was in New York, you had to go to the place to see if the wallpaper indeed had flowers on it. And so, you know, you like the whole afternoon would be just fact checking. Like even if it was an anecdote by the person, there were flowers over my head. All right, let's say that they had,
it was much more mobile to be a journalist then. No, it was like in the film noirs when you have the flip look and you're like, so where did they find the body?
Oh yeah, yes, exactly. Especially right around New York was amazing. If it wasn't in New York, you'd call the restaurant and have them describe the wallpaper to you, not asking leading questions. The idea was that, you know, mistakes, errors of fact could be used to justify libel claims. So if, you know, the person would be like, you can't even get the wallpaper right, so how can you get, you know, OJ's defense right? Then there were things like, oh yeah, you always like had to call way up the chain on the grounds that we were the New Yorker. So someone said she was wearing an Hermes jacket, or someone was described as wearing a black Hermes jacket with back vents, like some vent in the back. So I had to call like the vice president in charge of America at Hermes and say, do you make this thing with back vents, right? I mean, what else was I going to do? And she was like, yes, I would describe these as back vents, you know. She's like Parisian. I was like, you sure? And it's black, not like dark gray. Okay, got it. Then
Did you put their names? Like, did they have anything at stake? Like, said the vice president of Hermes America? I don't know.
Yeah, no, we didn't. No, we just like, you know, you didn't do that many citations. Yeah. Oh, if you needed to be sure that someone was a countess, say, there's a book called Burke's Peerage, where you like go through and check, and it's released every year to see like what the peerage is in various countries and what titles people have. There was Grove's Dictionary of Music. There was the Jewish Encyclopedia, where you could look up like any like Yiddish concepts that you needed to know. You had to check all foreign words. So we had all of us had Cassell's French, German, Webster's Dictionary. We had a geographical source book that I can't remember the name of to get like the names of things. We had Facts on File, which like came in regularly. And then ultimately we had LexisNexis. But
sounds like my dream life. Like your job is to look things up in a dictionary and you get paid
everything
for this.
about it.
Amazing.
It was the best job. Oh, and then of course you had to call people. All right, I'll give you one last anecdote. I had to call people. There was a description of like this head of the Taxi and Limousine Commission in New York, and I can't remember his name, but it was like, you know, a stout man with thinning hair, you know, around 5'4", whatever, did this thing. I have to call him to fact check like if this description is right. So I was like, so it seems like you're a sort of a sturdy person, and how, you know, I don't know how old you are, but how's your, you know, to try to get him to say, and he just went, I'm short and fat to me in the thing. And I was like, shit, thank you so much.
I think this is where we should stop the salon. Like, this is why you guys, whatever your woes are about the internet, it's much better now. Nobody has to call you, ask you about your weight, your hairline. They just Google you. It's fine. I love this.
Exactly.
I wish you
Thanks, Sarah.
like a Proustian length autobiography, because every time I speak to you, these incredible stories come out, and I think you're a true historian of our moment, and I'm so happy that you do the work you do and that you joined us tonight. And everybody, this has been a joy to listen to all of your perspectives and generational experiences, personal, you know, the personal areas of your pioneering work as well, where you kind of go off the track from your generation. And anybody who's writing fiction, this is your time.
Anna, thank you so much. And thanks everyone. It was just great to hear all these stories and good to see everyone. I like a salon. This is great.
See you on Mastodon and Twitter, guys. Bye. Take care. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.